Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. You all love it when the monster falls for the human, don't you? But nobody ever talks about the actual logistics, especially when your girlfriend is a 700-year-old predator who needs to feed, and you're a biochemistry student with late-night lab access and a streak of jealousy that is, well, slightly lethal. Today, we're looking at what happens when science tries to fix nature, and when an ancient vampire has to explain that biting other girls' necks is strictly dietary. Grab your lab coats and get ready because the chemistry today is going to be explosive. Let's head to the library. Where else would they be? It was their neutral ground. Minji was surrounded by a barricade of organic chemistry textbooks, while Zadie flipped through a 15th century manuscript with the same casual air most people have when reading a gossip rag. The silence of the central library wasn't absolute. It had layers. There was the rhythmic creak of the oak shelves under the weight of centuries of paper, the dry snap of turning pages, and closer by the almost imperceptible scratch of Minji's pen as she scribbled complex biochemical formulas. The air smelled of old dust and Minji's lingering citrus perfume, a vibrant contrast to the icy aura emanating from Zadie. Zadie didn't look like she belonged in the present. Sitting in an uncomfortable wooden chair with the grace of someone who had once occupied thrones, she handled the parchment with long, dexterous fingers and a reverence that Minji found both fascinating and irritating. But Zadie's focus shifted. The movement was subtle, just a tilt of the head, a millimeter's adjustment in her posture, but Minji felt the atmospheric pressure in the room change. Zadie's eyes, dark as an eclipse, drifted from the Latin text to a table 3 rows ahead. She's staring again. Zadie's voice came like velvet scratching against fine wood, low enough not to break the silence rule, but intense enough to vibrate at the base of Minji's spine. Minji looked up, adjusting the glasses that kept sliding down her nose, which was damp with a cold sweat. She followed her girlfriend's gaze and found Harper. The girl was stiff, a pen suspended between her lips, her calculating eyes fixed on them. It wasn't a look of admiration, it was the look of someone trying to solve a dangerous equation. "I'm fairly certain that girl has figured out what I am," Zadie continued, without a trace of fear, just a tactical observation. "She has that metallic scent of constant adrenaline. People who watch too closely usually see things they shouldn't." Minji felt a tightening in her chest. Her pen stopped mid-air. The thought of Zadie being discovered was a constant nightmare, but there was something else in the vampire's voice that bothered her. "And what do you plan to do?" Minji whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you going to bite her? Use your encirclement to wipe her memory before she opens her mouth?" Zadie gave a half smile, a movement that revealed just the tip of a canine before it was hidden by the curve of her lips. That predatory smirk always made Minji's heart skip a beat, a mix of biological terror and an attraction that science could never explain. "It's not necessary," Zadie leaned back, closing the book with a soft thud. "Actually, in another life or another time, that sharp-eyed girl would make an excellent ally. She has grit." Minji narrowed her eyes, a spark of jealousy beginning to burn like acid. "An ally? What kind of ally, Zadie? Are you recruiting observers for your 1,000-year-old fan club now?" Zadie simply held Minji's gaze for a beat that felt far too long, an eternity contained in seconds. Then she turned her head to the side, looking right at us, breaking the fourth wall, gave a slow wink, and turned back to Minji. "That, my dear nerd, is a topic for another episode." Minji shook her head, ignoring the mystery, but Zadie let out a cold sigh, adjusting her posture. "But I'm not going to bite Harper. I need another girl. I'm hungry, Minji, and for someone like me, deprivation isn't just an inconvenience, it's a sentence. Without blood, vampires don't die, but they go mad, and humanity isn't ready to deal with a thirsty, insane immortal," Zadie explained, her tone turning dramatically more serious. "But honestly, hunting lately has been deplorable. The blood of you modern college students tastes like stress, anxiety, and triple-shot espressos. It's undrinkable. I get hungry every 2 days, and with so many people here, it's outrageous to have to go so far for a decent meal." "You're too picky," Minji grumbled, trying to mask her tremor with sarcasm. "I am 700 years old," Zadie retorted, her aristocratic elegance reshaping her features. I deserve quality, and to be clear, I gave up on male blood about 5 centuries ago. Too much testosterone leaves a bitter aftertaste, a terrible metallic tang that scrapes the throat. But women are much more flavorful, light, sweet. The image was painted with the precision of a sadistic artist, and Minji's refusal to accept it was the breaking point. Zadie spoke about savoring other women with the nonchalance of someone discussing the menu at a French patisserie. Minji's world stopped. The air fled her lungs. The vision of Zadie pressing her lips to a stranger's neck, feeling the pulse quicken under her mouth, the intimacy of the hunt, the absolute possession, it hit her like an anvil. Her blood boiled, but her pride was a wall too high for a feeling as mundane as jealousy to climb. She was a scientist, and scientists don't make jealous scenes in libraries. They solve problems in the lab. 2 days later, the digital clock on the biochemistry lab wall read 3:14 a.m., and the air smelled of synthetic iron, ozone, and blind determination. The cold overhead lights reflected off the impeccably clean metal benches, where beakers and test tubes sat like soldiers in a trench. Minji stood there, her white lab coat buttoned perfectly to the neck, gripping her clipboard so hard her knuckles had gone white. She was using it like a shield, but the real threat wasn't chemical. It was the woman sitting on the stool in front of her. Zadie, the immortal, held a test tube of red sludge by her fingertips, looking deeply offended. The exhaustion was obvious, but Minji's stubbornness was a force of nature. "So," Minji began, the click of her pen cutting through the sterile silence like a declaration of war, "I've spent the last 48 hours developing a solution, nutritionally complete, palatable, and one that eliminates the need to hunt entirely. You don't need stressed-out college girls who taste like espresso anymore. I solved the problem." Zadie raised an eyebrow. There was something in the phrasing, in its clinical precision, in the way Minji had carefully avoided any word that might sound like feeling, that the vampire filed away in silence, with the attentiveness of someone who has spent 700 years reading what goes unsaid. "You solved the problem," Zadie repeated, her tone neutral, her eyes faintly amused. "I did. Try batch 6. She was hoping for a miracle, but immortal biology doesn't negotiate with human hope. Zadie lifted the tube to eye level, studying the color with the suspicion of a queen facing a poisoned chalice. With a resigned sigh, she brought the glass rim to her lips and took a micro-sip. The predator's untouchable face contorted into a grimace so violent it instantly shattered centuries of dignity and aristocratic composure. "Minji," Zadie choked, shoving the tube away as if it contained sulfuric acid. She coughed, wiping the back of her free hand across her lips. This tastes like melted plastic mixed with car battery acid. It's an abomination, a hate crime against my biology." "It has the exact nutrients, artificial hemoglobin, perfect iron levels, B-complex vitamins," Minji shot back, her voice climbing a pitch, sounding like a sommelier on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She tapped her pen against the clipboard. "The viscosity is at 98% of the real thing. You're not even trying, Zadie. The molecular structure is correct." "The molecular structure can be perfectly correct and still be undrinkable, my dear," Zadie said, placing the tube back in the rack with a care that contrasted sharply with the look of disgust still on her face. She studied Minji for a moment, the exhaustion stamped beneath her glasses, the reagent stains on a lab coat that was clearly not the same one from yesterday, the tension in the shoulders of someone who hadn't slept. "This initiative is remarkable. How long have you been here?" "That's not relevant to the experiment." "Minji." 43 hours, she admitted, her pen tapping against the clipboard. "With breaks." Zadie was quiet for a second. Then, with the gentleness of someone trying not to startle a bird, she said, "All of this to solve the problem with my diet." It wasn't a question, and the specific weight she placed on the word problem was a lure, subtle, almost imperceptible. Minji didn't take it, or chose not to. "It's a scientifically relevant problem," Minji said, Xi's eyes fixed on her clipboard. "The synthesis of a functional hematological substitute would have enormous applications beyond your case." Of course it would, Zadie agreed, and there was a quiet warmth in her voice that Min-ji, too absorbed in her notes, didn't catch on her face. Try batch 7, maybe this time you've gotten there. Min-ji looked up, slightly caught off guard by the lack of resistance. She prepared the new tube, transferred the sample with precision, and handed it to Zadie with the restraint of someone holding their breath. Zadie took the microsip. This time, the grimace took a beat longer to arrive, and when it came, it was slightly less catastrophic. She set the tube down slowly, ran her tongue across her lips as if evaluating a difficult wine, and tilted her head. "Still far off," she said finally, "but less aggressive. You're getting there." Min-ji looked at her, then at the tube, then back at Zadie with the expression of someone whose brain is running a quiet data inconsistency check. Zadie held her gaze with the unshakable calm of 700 years of poker face. Min-ji chose not to run the check. She wrote something on her clipboard. "Then we have a deal," she said, her voice recovering its clinical steadiness. "You stick with batch 7 while I refine the formula. No hunting." "No hunting," Zadie confirmed, and there was a softness in the quickness of her answer that this time Min-ji wasn't looking up to catch. Min-ji's determination was a thin facade over the desperation consuming her from the inside. Zadie looked at her girlfriend with a tenderness that softened the room, even through the nausea, because batch 7 had been every bit as awful as batch 6, whatever she had said to the contrary. She had lied to spare her feelings, but romance couldn't stop the hunger clock. 1 week later, the reality was brutal and written all over Zadie's face. Under the lab's harsh white light, the shadows beneath her eyes looked like old bruises. Her dark skin had lost its golden glow, taking on a dull, lifeless tone. When she placed the tube back in the rack, Min-ji noticed, with a knot in her throat, that the vampire's fingertips were trembling slightly. Zadie was getting sick. She had kept the agreement, returning to the lab religiously, swallowing batch 7 with the expression of someone serving a sentence, but she was starving. Quietly, because some gentle lies cost more than they seem. The guilt was heavy, but the silent solution Zadie found was the fastest path to disaster. To avoid hurting her girlfriend, to avoid seeing the frustration and pain in those almond-shaped eyes behind the safety goggles, Zadie made a stupid, desperate decision. She would hunt again, in the dark, in secret, like the creature of the shadows Min-ji was desperately trying to domesticate. The bass of the electronic music pulsed through the damp grass, a muffled vibration that barely scratched the darkness of the Sigma frat garden. It was the weekend, and the campus was submerged in that predictable chaos of sweaty bodies, cheap booze, and bad decisions. But there, in the thick shadows behind the ancient oaks, the silence was an isolated predator. The distance between the party lights and the dark brush was the border between human life and Zadie's domain. Time was running out, and Zadie's control was hanging by an invisible thread. She leaned her back against the rough tree trunk, her eyes fixed on the girl who had stepped away from the group for some air. She was a perfect volunteer, heart beating at a pace accelerated by alcohol, but without the acidic tension of chronic anxiety. Zadie guided her mentally, the ensorcelment flowing from her eyes like an invisible, soft, hypnotic mist. The girl's mind went foggy, her steps leading her obediently away from the yellow porch lights, plunging into the darkness where the vampire waited. The hunger was a forest fire in Zadie's chest. She pulled the girl close, feeling the heat radiate from human skin, the sound of blood rushing through the carotid artery sounding like a deafening symphony to her amplified senses. Her fangs dropped, brushing the thin skin of the girl's neck, anticipation making her brown eyes glow with a dark, hungry red. She knew she was betraying a silent agreement, but the interruption came from where she least expected. Crack. The sound of a dry branch snapping under the sole of a pair of Chuck Taylors wasn't loud, but in the hyper-vigilant world of a vampire, it sounded like a cannon shot. Zadie stopped. Her muscles froze, her body rigid millimeters away from piercing her prey's skin. The scent of the girl's synthetic strawberry perfume was suddenly swallowed by an aroma Zadie knew better than her own breath. ozone, stale coffee, and unscented soap. The vampire slowly looked up, breaking her prey's trance. There she was, a few yards away, the faint light of a distant street lamp silhouetting her against the shadows. Minji had her arms crossed tight against her chest, her shoulders tense. Her face didn't show the paralyzing shock of terror, it showed a visceral, painful mixture of white-hot rage, pure exhaustion, and a vulnerability so raw it seemed to bleed into the night air. Zadie's response couldn't be words, not yet. The weight of what she was about to do fell on her shoulders like molten lead. With a sigh that sounded like a biting winter wind, she released the girl's shoulders. Her eyes focused on the student's clouded mind. With a soft, commanding murmur, she rewrote the last 3 minutes of the girl's memory, injecting the suggestion of a sudden, harmless thirst. The girl blinked, confused for a second, spun on her heels and stumbled back toward the yellow light of the fraternity in search of a glass of water, leaving the monster and the scientist alone in the dark.
Quick pause on the research. Liking and subscribing to this channel actually reduces your stress and lowers your cortisol. Zadie appreciates the gourmet snack. Drop a like and let's get back to the story.
As soon as the girl disappeared from sight, the dam broke. "Seriously, Zadie? In the Sigma bushes?" Minji almost screamed, her voice cracking. "You said it was working. I looked you in the eyes, asked if we had a deal, and you said yes. And you're still here, in the dark, with someone else. It's not just about the science, and you know it. It's about you pressing your lips against someone else, feeling her pulse quicken under your mouth. It's about me standing on the outside while you choose any stranger over me. How am I supposed to not feel invisible when the only person you never taste is me?" Zadie closed the distance between them in a blur of speed. Before Minji could react, the vampire's icy hands were framing her face, forcing her to look directly into the dark abyss of her eyes. Minji tried to pull away. She couldn't, not because Zadie held her with force, but because her own legs simply refused the order. The rage still burned in her chest, but beneath it was something more fragile, something that ached in a different way. "Minji, look at me, listen to me," Zadie said, her voice low, laden with a sincerity that seemed to come from the depth of centuries. "What you saw isn't desire. It never was. I feel no attraction to that girl or any other girl I've ever hunted. It is strictly survival. It's mechanical. It's like breathing polluted air because it's the only air available." "Polluted air," Minji repeated, her voice thin and sharp. "What a comforting image, Zadie." "Minji." "No." She closed her eyes for a second, her jaw tight. When she opened them, tears were already at the corners, but her voice was steady. "You talked about the way they taste like you were describing a vintage wine. Light, sweet. Do you think I can just turn that off?" Zadie didn't answer immediately. Her thumbs moved slowly over Minji's cheeks, a gesture so careful it seemed she was afraid to break her. "I taste them because they are prey," Zadie said, every word measured. "They are external to me. They are resources. But you? Don't tell me I'm special in some generic way," Minji warned, her voice failing at the end, betraying how much she needed to hear the exact opposite. "It's not generic," Zadie replied, and there was something different in her tone now, something older and more tired, as if she were about to reveal something she'd carried for a long time. She pressed her forehead against Minji's, and for the first time, Minji felt a heat emanating from the vampire's skin, a heat that shouldn't exist. "Humans love in a plural way, Minji. You spread affection, you build complex divisions in your hearts. But vampires of my lineage? My parents are vampires. I wasn't turned, I was born. And those like me love absolutely, obsessively. When we truly fall in love, body and soul, our biology completely alters. Minji opened her mouth, but Zadie continued before she could interrupt, not with brutality, but with the urgency of someone finally saying something that needed to be said long ago. The blood of the beloved completely loses its predatory appeal. The scent doesn't trigger hunger. The taste, if I tried, would be ashes in my mouth. It's the way our nature ensures that never, under any circumstances, even in a moment of lost control or frenzy, we would harm the person who is the center of our universe. My ensorcelment fails on you because my nature recognizes you as an extension of myself, not as a resource.
The silence that followed was different from the ones before. Minji stood still, her eyes fixed on Zadie's, her brain spinning in slow motion, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of what she had just heard. A part of her, the part that had spent 2 nights awake in front of beakers and centrifuges, wanted to ask for bibliographic references. She wanted a molecular mechanism, a metabolic pathway, anything that could be put on a clipboard. But there was another part, the part that had cried alone in the lab bathroom at 4 in the morning without really knowing why, and that part understood before the brain even got there. The revelation fell on Minji's shoulders not as a weight, but as a storm of warm water washing away the wounds in her mind. Zadie's biological repulsion to her blood wasn't rejection. It was, in fact, the greatest declaration of love and possession the dark world of immortals could offer. The absence of hunger was the pinnacle of devotion. The physical tension between them shifted. What was a battlefield became a sanctuary. The acidic jealousy simply melted away right there, fertilizing the fraternity garden grass. Minji's hands moved up, hesitant at first, until they gripped Zadie's wrists, her warm fingers seeking the calming contrast of immortal skin. Their gazes locked, the distance between their lips being consumed millimeter by millimeter. The heat of Minji's breath met Zadie's coolness, a collision of seasons that made the outside world vanish. And in the moment breath faltered, when surrender became imminent and the night covered them like a dense, silent cloak, Minji's scientific side took back control, but this time not to fight nature, but to rule it. "So I'm the only safe person in the world near you?" Minji asked, her voice almost gone. "You're the only person I can't," Zadie replied, bringing her lips close to Minji's ear. "It's the most sacred biological safety lock there is. And I swear, in 700 years, in all the courts, in all the grand and decadent ballrooms I've frequented, I have never been as monogamous as I am with you." Zadie went silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something lower, more careful. "But you've never been to bed with me. You don't know how intense things can get." Minji didn't answer immediately. The garden was quiet around them, the frat music now a distant, irrelevant echo. "Then show me," she said finally, simple, no flourishes. Zadie pulled back just enough to look her in the face. There was something different in her eyes now, not the hungry, predatory glow from minutes ago, but something older and gentler, like a candle flame in a dark hallway. "Minji." The name came out as a fond warning. "I don't sleep, I don't get warm, I don't get tired, and when I like someone—" She paused, choosing the word with the care of someone who knows the weight of each one. "I am a lot. You need to be sure." Minji adjusted her glasses with a finger, a gesture so automatically her that Zadie almost smiled. "I spent 2 days synthesizing artificial blood at 3 in the morning out of jealousy," Minji said, her voice dry but her eyes soft. "So I think we've established that I'm not very good at doing things by halves." Zadie was silent for a moment. Then she reached out her hand. Minji took it. Minji's room was small, like all dorm rooms, a twin bed, a desk taken over by scientific journals, and a window that let in more cold than light. But when Zadie closed the door behind them, the space seemed to shrink even more, or perhaps just get denser, as if the air knew something irreversible was about to happen. Zadie didn't rush. It was the first thing Minji noticed, the complete absence of urgency in a creature that had been starving hours ago. Every movement was deliberate, as if Zadie had all the time in the world, because for her, in a way, she did. When Zadie brushed the hair from Minji's face with her fingertips, the human closed her eyes involuntarily. The touch was cold, but not uncomfortable. It was like pressing your forehead against a window pane in summer, a strange, precise relief. "You're shaking," Zadie observed, without judgment. "I'm aware," Minji replied, eyes still closed. "I can stop." "You can't," Minji said, opening her eyes to meet Zadie's, "because I don't want you to stop. I'm just processing." "Take all the time you need." "Did you just imply you have 700 years of patience?" "I might have." Minji let out a half laugh, tense and genuine at the same time, and it was exactly that laugh, that untied the last knot in her chest. She didn't lead anything. She let Zadie navigate the space between them with that quiet, ancient precision, learning Minji's contours as if she were memorizing something she intended to keep forever.
Zadie's intensity wasn't about being rough, it was about being everywhere at once. For someone like Minji, who had built a life on isolating variables and controlling environments, losing her grip on her own senses was both terrifying and transcendent. Zadie was everywhere. No matter where Minji tried to anchor her logic, she met the vampire's cold, deliberate touch, systematically dismantling her defenses. Zadie's temperature, initially a shock against her skin, soon became the only cure for the fever burning through Minji. Then there was the matter of breath. Zadie didn't need it. She never needed a break, never lost her rhythm, and never showed a hint of exhaustion. It was an unyielding devotion, a slow motion drowning as the vampire pulled her deeper and deeper. In the quiet depth of the night, as the room seemed to drift free of gravity, and Minji's nails dug into Zadie's immortal shoulders, she finally understood the garden's warning. To be loved by a creature who had centuries to perfect what to do with her hands and lips was, quite simply, overwhelming. But Minji didn't ask her to stop. Not once. Morning arrived with the specific cruelty of Saturday mornings: too much light, too early. Minji woke up on her side, cheek resting on Zadie's shoulder, her hair a complete disaster. For a few seconds, she just lay there, listening to the silence of the vampire's chest. No heartbeat, no breath, just absolute stillness, and yet it was the most restful place she had slept in weeks. Zadie was awake, naturally. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling, a closed book resting on her stomach, as if she had waited for Minji to finish sleeping with the patience of someone who has nothing else urgent in the world. "Morning," Minji murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "Technically, it's 10:40. "Morning, Zadie." "Morning, Minji." The silence that followed was the comfortable kind, without sharp edges. Minji looked at the window, where the light cut through the blinds in thin, golden stripes. Zadie kept looking at the ceiling. It was Minji who spoke first, her voice still sleepy but her brain clearly already in gear. "I was thinking." "I know, I can hear you thinking. Your breathing has a specific rhythm when you're building a hypothesis." Minji lifted her head to look at her, slightly indignant. "That's invasive. It's involuntary. Go on." Minji rested her chin on Zadie's cold shoulder, looking up. "The problem isn't the blood itself, it's the quality and the frequency. If I can extend your metabolic window and improve the conditions of the—" she hesitated, searching for the right word, "the field." Zadie turned her face slowly to look at her. "Are you describing my diet as an agricultural operation?" "I'm optimizing the system, with all the serenity of someone who just had a genuine epiphany. Batch 7 was wrong from the start. I was trying to replace when I should have been supplementing. And if the secondary problem is that the students are too stressed—" "Minji, I can solve that too. A wellness committee, yoga sessions, healthy sleep campaigns." "Minji, what?"
Zadie looked at her for a long moment with that specific expression that mixed secular admiration and a slightly exasperated tenderness. "You've been awake for 4 minutes." "I know. We just had our first night together." "I know," Minji repeated, and there was a genuine warmth in her voice now, beneath all the logic. "And it was a very significant data point." Zadie was silent for a second. Then she gave that low, deep laugh that vibrated through Minji's shoulder and up to the ceiling of the small, messy room. "Okay, nerd, talk to me," she said, pulling Minji back close with one arm, a gesture that completely contradicted the instruction.
Minji didn't hesitate and kept talking with an excitement that made Zadie smile with pride. The final agreement, diplomatic and inviolable, was sealed between them that morning. Zadie would hunt alone, strictly once a week. It would be surgical, quick, and hygienic. She would feed, wipe the recent memories, and leave the victim with nothing but the memory of a confusing night and a classic mosquito bite itch on the neck. No loose ends. "Just don't tell me the details of the hunt," Minji murmured, her voice husky with sleep, her index finger drawing slow, rhythmic circles on the soft fabric of the band t-shirt Zadie was wearing. "I understand the logistics of your biology, babe. I swear I accept what you are, believe me." The confession hung there, soft and honest, but soon the human's tone shifted, gaining that familiar sharp edge. "But I'm still a slightly possessive human girlfriend," Minji warned, lifting her chin to meet Zadie's eyes. "If I see you, by any chance, staring too long at the neck of one of those theater students in the Building B hallway, I'll be forced to assume you're just judging her questionable choice in necklaces. Am I clear, Zadie?" Zadie let out a low laugh. The deep sound vibrated against her chest, a resonance that massaged Minji's face tucked there. The vampire stroked her girlfriend's hair, leaning in to kiss the top of her head with a soft, cool reverence. "Deal, nerd," Zadie whispered against Minji's hair. "Anything else?" "I think I need to set up the committee," Minji said thoughtfully. "Okay, you're going to set up your committee, nerd," Zadie said, sliding her fingers through Minji's hair. "But not now. You remember the warning about me being obsessive and tireless, right? We still have 3 hours until your next class." The world outside was forgotten, heat and cold intertwined in an impossible but real balance, a peace built on concessions and advanced chemistry. But deep down, as Minji's breathing quickened again, staring breathlessly at the shadows on the ceiling, Zadie was smiling, savoring the taste of victory once again. In the following weeks, Batch 7 went into the trash. Minji returned to the lab with a new focus. If she couldn't replace the blood, she would optimize the monster's metabolism. And if the secondary problem was that the crop of college students was too stressed, souring her girlfriend's demanding palate, Minji would simply fix the entire crop. Working in the shadows, not out of jealousy but as a brilliant strategist, she created a hyper-concentrated supplement in capsule form, a massive bomb of iron, rare minerals, and vitamin complexes that didn't replace the need for human blood, but acted like a high-octane protein bar for the vampire system. The supplement forced Zadie's body into a sort of light metabolic lethargy, easily extending the mandatory hunting window from 2 chaotic days to an entire week. But the student's possessive genius didn't stop there. With the support of the student union, Minji founded the Committee for University Wellbeing and Mental Health. Overnight, the campus was unrecognizable. Health campaigns flooded the bulletin boards. Booths handed out info leaflets between classes. The main lawn now hosted sunset yoga sessions, and the auditorium held grand lectures on the importance of 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep and a clean diet. The dean loved the initiative, praising the students' civic spirit. The students, exhausted by their own neuroses, embraced the cause with fervor. The university became incredibly, disturbingly serene and healthy. And Zadie? The ancient predator gained access to a totally gourmet hunting ground. It was a free-range, grass-fed, low-cortisol, open buffet, a premium predatory experience, without Minji having to violate a single medical ethics rule on her resume. And the moral of the story? Never let jealousy destroy your relationship. Turn it into a public policy for student well-being and optimize your immortal girlfriend's diet. If you enjoyed this scientific, supernatural comic relief, leave a like and subscribe. See you in the next drama.